Layla's story, A Silent Signal Revolution. Chapter 1, The Mornings of Ouagadougou. The mornings in Ouagadougou always arrived slowly, softly, filled with life. When the first rays of sunlight touched the dirt roads, the entire scene would bathe in golden hues. Small houses with weathered walls, the clinking sounds of old bicycles, women carrying large vessels on their heads, and somewhere nearby, the aroma of freshly baked millet bread. All of this combined to create the city's unique identity. In these peaceful streets lived 8-year-old Layla with her mother, Rahel. Two lives intertwined, bound by a love that was pure and deep. Their home was simple, but every corner radiated the warmth of life. Outside their house was a small garden where Layla had planted sunflowers with her own hands. Every morning before school, she would spend a few moments among them, as if these flowers were the guardians of her tiny kingdom. Layla was a quiet child, deeply sensitive yet remarkably perceptive. Watching raindrops race down the window, smiling at the distant sound of drums, or getting lost in the colors of a passing caravan, these small things brought her heart immense joy. She lived in a world of wonder, where every moment held the possibility of magic. Rahel worked as a nurse at one of Ouagadougou's clinics. She often had to work day and night shifts. The screams of patients, rushing ambulances, and the harsh lights of the hospital had become part of her exhaustion. But when she returned home and Layla nestled into her arms, all that burden seemed to dissolve into thin air. Rahel believed her daughter was growing up in a safe world, a world where no evil could come near her. She often said, "Daughter, the world is good, truly good, but caution is necessary." But for Layla, caution was just a word whose meaning she couldn't quite grasp. After school, Layla's favorite place was the city's public library. Filled with wooden shelves and colorful books, this place was nothing less than a magical world for her. The librarian, Miss Shanda, knew her by name and would often set aside special stories just for her. Layla would sit there, open her drawing book, and lose herself in her imaginary world: dragons, castles, desert landscapes, and flying birds. Everything came alive beneath her fingertips. Chapter 2, The Silent Warning. 3 weeks ago, there had been a special assembly at school. The morning had been different from usual. Instead of the regular routine of math and reading, all the students from grades 1 through 6 were gathered in the main hall. The wooden benches creaked as hundreds of children settled down, their curious whispers filling the air like the buzzing of bees. Principal Ouedraogo stood at the front, his tall frame casting a long shadow across the polished floor. Beside him stood a police officer in full uniform, Officer Amadou, a man whose reputation preceded him. He had served in the National Security Forces for 15 years and had recently joined the Child Protection Unit, a division created specifically to address the growing concerns about child safety in urban areas. "Children," Principal Ouedraogo began, his voice carrying the weight of importance, "today we have a special visitor who will teach you something that might one day save your life." A ripple of interest passed through the crowd. Some children sat up straighter. Others exchanged nervous glances. Layla, sitting in the third row between her best friend Amina and a boy named Kofi, felt a small flutter of curiosity mixed with unease. Officer Amadou stepped forward. Unlike many adults who spoke to children in condescending tones, he addressed them as equals. "I'm going to teach you a secret language," he said, his deep voice somehow gentle. "A language that works even when you can't speak, even when you're too scared to scream, even when someone is watching you and you need to call for help without them knowing." The hall fell completely silent. Every child's eyes were now fixed on the officer. "This signal," he continued, raising his right hand, "has saved lives in other countries. It was created during a time when people couldn't always speak freely, when they needed to communicate danger silently." He demonstrated slowly, palm open, facing the camera or another person, then the thumb folded inward toward the palm, and finally the 4 fingers closing over the thumb, creating a fist that looked almost normal but contained that crucial tucked thumb. "This means I need help. I'm in danger. It's silent, it's quick, and if the right person sees it, they can save you." He made the children practice. Row by row, they raised their hands and created the signal. Some giggled nervously. Some treated it like a game, competing with friends to see who could do it faster. Teachers walked among the rows, correcting finger positions, ensuring thumbs were properly tucked. Layla practiced along with everyone else. H. Her small fingers formed the signal: easily open palm, thumb in, fingers closed. She did it 5 times, maybe 6, until teacher Marie nodded approvingly at her. The gesture felt strange, awkward, even like a secret handshake for a club she hoped she'd never need to join. Officer Amadou told them stories, not fairy tales, but real accounts from around the world. A girl in Canada who used this signal during a video call and was rescued from a kidnapping. A boy in Europe who made the gesture from a car window, and an observant driver called the police. Each story was carefully chosen to inform without terrifying, to empower without creating paranoia. "Remember," Officer Amadou said as the assembly concluded, "this is not a game. This is a tool. Keep it in your heart like a spare key you hope you'll never need to use. But if you do need it, use it boldly. Someone will see. Someone will help." The children filed out of the hall, chattering excitedly. Some continued practicing the signal as they walked. Others were already distracted by thoughts of lunch or recess. For Layla, the gesture joined the collection of things adults had taught her for safety. Look both ways before crossing, don't touch hot stoves, don't talk to strangers, and now this, a silent cry for help. That afternoon, she mentioned it to her mother while Rahul was preparing dinner. "Mama, we learned a special signal today for if we're in danger." Rahul, stirring a pot of groundnut soup, turned with interest. "Show me, darling." Layla demonstrated the signal. Rahul's expression shifted from curiosity to something more solemn. She put down her wooden spoon and knelt beside her daughter. "That's very important, Layla, very important." She held her daughter's small hand in her own. "I pray to God you never need to use it, but I'm glad you know it. Promise me you'll remember it." "I promise, Mama." But promises made by 8-year-olds, however sincere, often fade with time. As days turned into weeks, the signal became just another memory filed away in Layla's mind, buried under more immediate concerns like spelling tests and playground games and the new library books that arrived every Thursday. Life continued its gentle rhythm. Every evening, Rahul would return from her nursing shifts, sometimes exhausted, sometimes energized by having helped save a life. She would kick off her shoes, embrace Layla, and together they would prepare dinner, sometimes rice with sauce, sometimes couscous, sometimes the millet cakes Layla loved. After dinner came the best part, story time. Rahul was a magnificent storyteller. She would weave tales of brave animals and clever children, of ancient kingdoms and magical transformations. Her stories always carried lessons about kindness, courage, cleverness, and the importance of family. Layla would snuggle against her mother's side, breathing in her familiar scent of hospital soap and shea butter, feeling utterly safe and loved. On weekends, they would visit the market together. Rahul would teach Layla how to choose the best vegetables, how to bargain respectfully with vendors, how to carry herself with dignity even in crowded spaces. These were lessons in more than shopping. They were lessons in navigating the world. The neighborhood knew them well. Madame Caboret, who sold fabrics 3 doors down, would always save scraps for Layla's craft projects. Mr. Sawadogo, the elderly man who repaired bicycles under the large baobab tree, would tell Layla jokes that made her giggle. The young mothers with babies would sometimes ask Rahul for medical advice, which she would give freely, her nurses' training extending beyond the hospital walls. In this cocoon of community and care, danger seemed impossible. The very idea that something bad could happen to Layla felt as distant as snow in the Sahara. Rahul did take precautions. She had taught Layla never to accept rides from strangers, never to open the door when she was alone, never to go anywhere without telling her mother first. These rules were woven into the fabric of daily life, so familiar they hardly seemed like warnings anymore. But what Rahul didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that danger doesn't always announce itself with obvious signs. Sometimes it watches from a distance, patient and calculating. Sometimes it wears a familiar face. Sometimes it has been planning for months, maybe years, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. No one had any idea that this small world was about to reach a terrifying turning point that no one could have imagined. Within this 5-kilometer radius, everything seemed so safe that danger was just a distant word, a story that happened somewhere else, to other people in other cities. But stories always break in the safest of places, and the breaking point in Layla's life was about to enter very quietly, in a way that neither she nor her mother had any knowledge of. The signal officer Amadou had taught them, simple gesture of palm, thumb, and folded fingers had been filed away in Layla's memory, waiting. Just waiting. Because some lessons, even forgotten ones, have a way of emerging exactly when they're needed most. Chapter 3, The Shadow of Silence. 2 years ago, Craig Bartles Henderson had appeared in Rahal's life like a storm cloud on a clear day. He worked at the same hospital, not as a doctor or nurse, but as an administrative clerk in the records department. His office was in the basement, a windowless room filled with filing cabinets and the musty smell of old paper. He was 43 years old, unmarried, living alone in a rented apartment on the outskirts of the city. To most people, Craig seemed unremarkable. He wore the same rotation of 5 shirts, always pressed and tucked in. His shoes were always polished, his hair always combed with mathematical precision. He spoke softly, never raised his voice, and completed his paperwork with meticulous attention to detail. Colleagues described him as quiet and efficient, the kind of person you'd forget was in the room. But beneath that carefully constructed normalcy lurked something darker. Craig's apartment walls were covered with photographs, not of family or friends, but of women he'd encountered throughout his life. Former classmates, coworkers, women he'd seen on the bus. He would take their pictures from social media, print them, and arrange them in elaborate patterns, creating shrines to his obsessions. Rahul had first caught his attention on a random Tuesday morning. She had been rushing through the hospital corridor late for her shift, her nurse's uniform crisp and white, her hair tied back in a practical bun. She had smiled at him, just a polite, absent-minded smile, the kind you give to any colleague you pass. For Craig, that smile was everything. From that day forward, he began to construct an entire fantasy around Rahul. He would time his breaks to coincide with hers, accidentally appearing in the cafeteria when she was having lunch. He would find excuses to deliver files to her floor personally, even when they could have been sent through the usual channels. He memorized her schedule, knew which days she worked late, which days she left early. At first, Rahul barely noticed. In a busy hospital, you interact with dozens of people daily, and most encounters blur together. But gradually, Craig's presence became harder to ignore. He would stand too close when talking to her. His eyes would linger too long. He started bringing her small gifts, nothing expensive or overtly romantic, just things like a cup of coffee or a pastry from the hospital cafeteria, always with the excuse that he'd bought too much or someone had given it to him. Rahul tried to maintain professional courtesy while creating distance. She would thank him politely, but firmly, then excuse herself quickly. She stopped eating in the cafeteria when she knew he might be there. She changed her routes through the hospital to avoid passing his office. But Craig interpreted her evasion as shyness, her discomfort as modesty. In his distorted worldview, every rejection was a test of his devotion, every avoidance a sign that she was waiting for him to prove his worthiness. The situation escalated 6 months into his obsession. Craig started following Rahul after work. He would wait in the parking lot, then trail her bus from a distance in his car. He learned where she lived, which market she shopped at, which route Layla took to school. He told himself he was protecting her, making sure she was safe. One evening, Rahul stayed late to help with an emergency case. By the time she left the hospital, it was past midnight, and the streets were dark and mostly empty. Craig was waiting. He approached her in the parking lot, and what he said that night, the words that tumbled out in a desperate, incoherent stream, made Rahul's blood run cold. He talked about destiny and soulmates. He said he'd been waiting for her all his life. He said they belonged together, that her late shifts proved she was lonely too, that he could make her happy if she'd just give him a chance. When Rahul tried to leave, he grabbed her wrist, not violently, but with a grip that was unmistakably possessive. "Let me go," Rahul had said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Let me go right now or I'll scream." The threat of public attention broke through Craig's delusion momentarily. He released her wrist, stepped back, but his eyes held something that frightened Rahul more than his touch, had a cold calculation, a reassessment of strategy. The next morning, Rahul went to the hospital administration and filed a formal complaint. She described the following: the unwanted attention, the parking lot confrontation. The administrators were sympathetic but limited in their power. Craig hadn't technically broken any laws. He worked at the hospital, so his presence wasn't trespassing. He hadn't threatened violence. He'd released her when asked. They promised to speak to him to issue a warning, but Rahul could see the unspoken message. Without clear evidence of a crime, their hands were tied. She went to the police next, filing a report at the local station. The officer who took her statement was kind but pragmatic. "Has he threatened you explicitly? Has he been to your home? Has he contacted you outside of work?" When Rahul answered no to each question, the officer sighed. Madam, I understand your concern, but until he commits an actual offense, we can't do much. Keep documenting everything, every encounter, every message if he sends any. If he escalates, come back immediately. Rahul felt the crushing weight of a system that could only react to harm, not prevent it. She increased her vigilance, varied her routes home, told neighbors to watch out for suspicious people. She thought about getting a restraining order but learned that the legal process was lengthy and required evidence of imminent danger, evidence she didn't have, at least not in a form the law would recognize. Then abruptly, Craig disappeared. One day he simply stopped coming to work. The hospital administration said he'd resigned, no explanation given. His apartment, when they eventually checked, had been cleared out. It was as if he'd evaporated into thin air. For the first few weeks, Rahul remained hypervigilant, jumping at shadows, checking over her shoulder constantly. But as weeks turned into months with no sign of him, she began to relax. She told herself he'd moved to another city, maybe even another country. Perhaps he'd gotten help, realized his behavior was wrong, chosen to start fresh somewhere else. What Rahul didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that some people don't give up, they just change tactics. Craig hadn't left. He'd simply moved further into the shadows. For 2 years, Craig watched from a distance. He had rented a small room in a building with a view of Rahul's street. He bought a camera with a telephoto lens. He created a new routine built entirely around surveillance. He would watch Layla leave for school each morning, note the time precisely. He would follow at a distance as Rahul walked to the bus stop. He documented everything in his notebook: what time the lights in their house went on and off, what day the garbage was collected, who visited them, and how often. His apartment became a shrine not just to Rahul, but to his grievance. The walls were covered with photos, but now they were connected with red string, creating a web of obsession. He had newspaper clippings about the hospital, bus schedules, school calendars. In the center of it all was a calendar where he marked Rahul's work schedule, predicted from 2 years of observation. Craig's mental state deteriorated gradually, so slowly that he didn't notice. He stopped seeing friends, not that he'd had many. He stopped engaging with the outside world except as it related to Rahul. His thoughts circled the same groove endlessly. She was meant to be his, something was keeping them apart. If he could just find the right approach, the right moment, she would understand. And then, like a poison blooming in dark water, a new thought emerged. If he couldn't have Rahul, he would take what she loved most. Layla, the daughter who filled Rahul's conversations, who made her smile, who was the center of her world. In Craig's twisted logic, taking Layla wasn't cruelty, it was strategy. Rahul would have to come to him then. She would have to acknowledge him, speak to him, need him. He began planning with the same meticulous attention he'd once applied to hospital records. He studied Layla's routine even more carefully than her mother's. He learned that on Tuesdays and Thursdays, Rahul worked a double shift, and Layla would go to the library after school. He learned that Miss Shanda, the librarian, was kind but often distracted. He learned that the library had cameras, but they were old and poorly maintained, with blind spots throughout the building. Craig bought new clothes, more professional looking, the kind a teacher might wear. He practiced his story in front of the mirror. "There's been an accident, your mother sent me, we need to hurry." He anticipated Layla's questions and prepared answers. He planned his route from the library to his car. From his car to the abandoned farmhouse he'd found 30 kilometers outside the city, a place where no one would hear screams, where no one would think to look. In his notebook, alongside the schedules and observations, he wrote justifications. "This is love. She'll understand eventually. We'll be a family." The pages grew darker as rational thought gave way to pure obsession. Danger never announces itself with trumpets and warnings. It grows in silence, behind closed doors, in the space between what people show the world and what they hide. It waits for the perfect moment, and when that moment comes, it moves with terrible speed. Rahul had no idea that the peace she felt was the calm before a hurricane. She thought the nightmare had ended 2 years ago when Craig disappeared. She didn't know it had only been sleeping, growing stronger, waiting. The shadow had been cast. It was only a matter of time before it fell. Chapter 4, that afternoon, the library silence. Ouagadougou's central library had always been considered a safe place for children. Long wooden shelves, colorful books, cool air, and a peaceful atmosphere away from the noise outside. Here, children would get lost in stories, young people in their studies, and elders would pass their evenings with newspapers. No one could think that something bad could happen to an innocent child in this very place. In the children's section of that library on that particular afternoon, Layla sat with her drawing book open. She was shading the wings of a large bird, thinking, I wish I could fly too. Her mother's shift still had an hour remaining. This was her usual free time. In that forest-like section of books stood a man. Craig Bartles Henderson, white shirt, khaki pants, polished shoes, and neatly combed hair. He looked like a teacher or clerk, but behind his eyes hid a deep darkness. He had been watching Layla for a long time, checking his watch every few moments, then looking around as if waiting for an opportunity. His gaze repeatedly returned to the door, then to the staff desk, then back to Layla. His intention had now become firm. Today, yes, today he would take her. When he finally approached her, Layla was absorbed in her drawing. When a shadow fell over her, she looked up, and it took her a few moments to recognize this stranger. That man she had occasionally seen with her mother in childhood, a hazy memory. Layla, he said with artificial concern, I've been looking for you. Your mother is at the hospital. There's been an accident. She sent me. Come quickly. The pencil fell from Layla's hand. Accident? Mother. Lines of fear appeared on her face, but something felt wrong. Why was this man standing so close? Why were his breaths so rapid? Why was there this restlessness in his voice? She remembered her mother's warnings about strangers. But this wasn't a stranger. He knew her mother and had correctly mentioned her mother's shift. Come, daughter, your mother is waiting. Craig extended his hand. Layla stepped back, but her resistance was very weak. She was only 8 years old, and there's nothing more cruel than lying about mothers. She murmured, Let me ask Miss Shanda. Craig bent down and spoke. There's no time. Your mother is in great pain. This sentence changed everything. Fear overwhelmed her courage. She walked with him. But as they reached near the door, she made one last attempt. Her hand slowly went to her pocket, touched her mobile phone, pressed some buttons without looking at the screen, and sent it. The message wasn't complete, but she had done what she could. Help Lib. The phone shut off. Perhaps in her nervousness, she had pressed the button too long. Craig didn't notice anything. The door opened, the warm evening air came in, and Layla was stepping out of that safest place with the man who was leading her toward destruction. Inside the library, no one had any idea that an innocent child had just been kidnapped at that very moment. Inside was silence, but outside, a story had begun that would shake all of Ouagadougou. Chapter 5, The Silent Call. Rahel had been working at the hospital for nearly 10 years, but the panic on her face that day was something no one had ever seen before. She was just moving away from a patient's bed when the phone in her pocket vibrated slightly. An ordinary moment, but that one moment turned her entire world upside down. On the screen, only 2 broken letters were glowing. Help Lib. That's all, no complete sentence, no details, no voice. But for a mother's heart, these 2 words were more dangerous than any scream. Rahel's breath stopped. She immediately tried calling. Layla's number was off. Again, off, off, off. The world seemed to shrink around her. She ran toward the hospital doors. The nurses working with her kept calling out, but she couldn't hear anything. In her heart, just one thought, Layla is in danger and I'm standing here. She reached the library at lightning speed. Her hands were trembling, her breath broken, and her heart about to burst out of its beats. As soon as she entered, Miss Shanda, sitting near the children's table, saw her condition and asked worriedly, Rahel, what happened? Rahel's voice trembled. Where is Layla? A few moments of silence. Then Miss Shanda's face turned pale. A man took her. He said you had sent him. He mentioned some accident. The ground slipped from under Rahel's feet. I didn't send anyone. Miss Shanda's lips trembled. Oh God, I didn't recognize him. He seemed very worried. I thought that Rahel... Rahel took support of the wall. Tears were flowing down her cheeks. It was Craig. He took my daughter. The books lay in their places. There was silence in the library, but Rahel's world had shattered. Chapter 6, The Alarm Sounds. The library staff immediately called the police. 5 minutes later, 2 police vans stopped at the door. Inspector Torres entered, stern-tempered but experienced officer. But when she saw a mother breaking down like this, the sternness in her eyes gave way to silence. Don't waste time. Pull the CCTV footage, her voice echoed. 4 people bent over screens in the guard room. The footage played. And after a few seconds, there he was, Craig, holding Layla's hand, forcefully pulling her outside. Even in the camera's blurry angle, he was clearly visible. Rahel screamed, This is him, this is him. Inspector Torres ordered, Get his car number, alert every checkpoint, issue a regional search, no road should be left unchecked. The entire Ouagadougou turned into an alarm. Police radios roared. Every bike squad, every patrol car, every roadblock received the information. Rahel sat on a chair, holding her head with both hands. Tears kept falling between her fingers. She kept murmuring, "Why didn't I make the case stronger? Why didn't I give his picture? Why didn't I show Layla his face?" Inspector Torres put her hand on her shoulder. "Rahel, this isn't your fault. We'll find him. Whatever happens, we'll bring her back." But the voice of fear doesn't listen to reason. In Rahel's ears, only one sound echoed. "My child, my Layla, she's alone." Chapter 7, Fate's Turn. At that very moment, a few kilometers away, another story was being written in a supermarket. President Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso, who often went among the people without any protocol, was present there today as well in ordinary clothes. He wanted to see people's real problems with his own eyes, not just read about them in reports. That day, he was slowly walking through the aisles with a basket in hand, thinking about what new safety tips to teach children in today's workshop. He believed that the real foundation of a nation is its children, and their safety is every citizen's duty. But then, as if the air had stopped, his gaze fell to the left side. A man was pulling a small girl's shoulder in a strange manner toward the front. Perhaps others would consider it ordinary, but Traoré's eye caught something else. Layla's hand. She was standing in front of the deep freezer section. Body stiff, fear in her eyes, and her hand palm forward, thumb tucked in, fingers folded. That signal, that hope, exactly that gesture. Exactly that signal that Ibrahim Traoré himself had taught thousands of children, the silent signal of "help me." A shock like lightning hit his chest. At that moment, he wasn't a politician nor a president. He was just a guardian, a soldier, a human being who had spent half his life protecting the weak. Traoré stopped. His eyes sharpened, like an old commander recognizing a target on the battlefield. That moment touched something deep within him, the same feeling he had experienced when he saved children from terror. The same thing that reminded him that protecting one child's life equals protecting the entire nation. Layla made that gesture again, this time in an even more frightened manner, hiding with trembling hands. Now the time for thinking was over. Traoré put his basket on the ground. He moved slowly in that direction, but every step carried purpose, seriousness, and battle readiness. He knew that if that man sensed someone had seen the girl's signal, he would run. So Traoré didn't go directly but circled around a large rack and came into their opposite path. Layla's eyes met his. There was a gleam of confidence in his eyes, as if she understood that help had arrived. Traoré took a deep breath, softened his tall stature, brought a smile to his face, and said loudly, "Oh, Craig, is it really you?" People around stopped. There was such confidence, such strength in his voice that the crowd involuntarily started looking toward him. Craig froze. Layla shuddered. Traoré spoke as if he had known him for years. "Hey, brother, when did you arrive? And this is your daughter. Mashallah, how lovely she is." Now people were slowly stopping to watch. Craig was trapped. He couldn't run, couldn't lie, because everyone's eyes were on him. Traoré bent down, casting his shadow over Layla, and whispered in Craig's ear, "I saw the signal. If you don't release her right now, this entire market will remember your face." Craig's face turned pale. His fingers loosened on their own, and then, in a shock of fear and failure, he pushed Layla and started running. Layla stumbled, but Traoré stepped forward and caught her. As soon as Layla came into his arms, she burst into loud sobs. Traoré just said this much, "Daughter, now you're with me, you're completely safe." That moment wasn't just a rescue. It was a spark that would give birth to a new security movement across the country in the coming days. Chapter 8, Mother and Meeting. Layla was trembling in Ibrahim Traoré's arms. The sound of her sobs was echoing in the supermarket parking lot, and Traoré held her as if he could truly protect her from every evil in the world. In his other hand was his mobile phone. He had already spoken with the police control room. "The child is safe, but the culprit has fled toward the east. Blue sedan, number plate has 67 in it. Immediately set up blockades." His voice was cold, but commanding, the voice of a president whose habit is to provide safety to his people. Within moments, sirens began to sound. People started gathering, some amazed, some praying, some with tearful eyes expressing gratitude. No one yet knew that the man standing in plain clothes was himself the president of Burkina Faso. But his manner, dignity, and the power of his words said it all. Layla was still trembling. Traoré held her more firmly, like a father holding his daughter, and whispered, "Now you're with me. The one who came to take you can't do anything now. You're safe, daughter." Those words weren't just consolation for Layla. They were the first feeling of hope. Then a voice echoed through the air, "Layla." Rahel came running into the parking lot. Her steps were stumbling, breath broken, in her eyes that fear she had felt 1,000 times in 2 hours. Police cars stopped, doors opened with thuds, but Rahel saw no one. She was just looking for her daughter. Then her eyes fell on Traoré's arms, her Layla. She ran, tears in her eyes, sobs on her lips. "My child, my Layla." Traoré bent down and moved Layla toward her mother. Layla fell into her mother's neck as if life had returned. Rahel sat on the ground, holding her daughter to her chest, crying, "My God, I had lost you." And at that moment, a new prayer echoed in Ouagadougou's air. A mother, a daughter, and a president who was not just a nation's guardian but humanity's protector. Chapter 9, the morning after silence. Traoré stepped back a few steps, respectfully, silently, as if watching the love between mother and daughter rebuild like a broken house piecing itself together again. Police officers moved toward him. "Sir, how did you?" The sentence was half finished when their eyes widened, lips involuntarily uttering, "Mr. President." Whispers ran through the crowd. "This is Ibrahim Traoré. He saved the girl. Oh, Allah, if he hadn't been there." Traoré silenced everyone with a hand gesture. "Today I wasn't the president, just a human who saw a girl's trembling hand. That's all." Rahel looked up with tearful eyes. Her voice was trembling. "Sir, I can't find words. You. Traoré walked slowly closer and said, "Madam, your daughter saved herself. She remembered that signal that was taught to her. I was just the man who saw it." Layla lifted her head from her mother's shoulder and murmured, "That gesture we learned at the library." Traoré smiled. "Yes, and you used it at the right time. You're very brave, daughter." Chapter 10, the beginning of a new dawn. In the parking lot, the commotion had now subsided, but in the air still hung that restlessness that remains after a major disaster passes. Police officers were talking on radios. Everyone was just waiting for that one news. Craig has been caught. Ibrahim Traoré stood near Rahel and Layla, but one step back, as if respecting their private world. Layla was still clinging to her mother, but her tears had stopped. On her face now was a strange maturity, as if a child had gained years of understanding in a few hours. Then an officer came running. "Sir, the blockade was successful. The culprit has been captured." These words fell on Rahel's heart like cool rain. She bent over her daughter's face, held her hair as if saying, "Now it's all over." Traoré took a deep breath, the breath taken after winning a war, which announces that life can now return. The officer continued. "He was trying to escape via the Eastern Highway. In the car, we found maps, toys, and a bag containing." He stopped, lips trembling. Traoré's eyebrows furrowed. "Whatever has been found, give it directly to the security unit. This family won't hear anything now." The officer bowed his head. Traoré looked again at Layla. Despite the exhaustion on her face, the strength there reminded one of a soldier. He bent down and spoke. "Do you want to say something, daughter?" Layla said softly, "I made that gesture that was taught at school. I thought no one would see it." Traoré sat on his knees at her level. Softness entered his strong voice. "You did the bravest thing in the world. This small gesture saved your life, and now this gesture will be taught to the entire country." Rahel looked up in amazement. "The entire country." Traoré stood up straight. There was a gleam of confidence in his eyes. "Today, if I hadn't been here, if someone hadn't seen it, all this must change. Every school, every library, every market, every person should know this signal. This isn't one girl's story, it's a question of the entire nation's security." Tears filled Rahel's eyes, this time not of fear, but of gratitude and pride. Now her daughter's story was going to become the safety of other children. Then a reporter came close. "Sir, can we report about this bravery?" Traoré raised his hand. "No news will be made today. Today only a mother will take her daughter home. Heroes are for hearts, not for cameras." The atmosphere was silent, but in that silence hid the prayers of the entire country. Traoré turned toward Rahel. Now you both go home. The police will monitor you, and tomorrow I will come to the school myself. We will teach this gesture to every child. Layla again held his hand, a small hand, but it carried the weight of 1,000 grateful prostrations. Traoré smiled. Come on, daughter, let's go home now. Chapter 11, not an end, but a beginning. Because on that day, a seed of new thinking was sown in Ouagadougou's soil, where every hand's fist would now become a voice. Help me, and Traoré would always be listening. The next day, there was commotion at Ouagadougou's central primary school. Teachers were forming lines, police were drawing security perimeters, and parents were amazed that the president was suddenly coming to school. But the real surprise came when Traoré entered through the school gate in plain clothes without protocol, with only 2 bodyguards. Whispers spread among the children. This is the president. He came himself. What happened? Is there a special occasion? Traoré didn't go straight to the stage. He walked through the children's rows, sometimes putting his hand on someone's shoulder, sometimes when a child asked fearfully, Sir, is everything okay? He bent down and said, Yes, everything is fine because you're all here. Then in the school auditorium, that incident was narrated, not like a drama, but in such a way that every mother's heart would tremble and understanding would descend into every child's eyes. Traoré held the microphone. His voice was soft, but every word was knocking on hearts. Yesterday, a girl named Layla used that gesture which was taught to her in just one school assembly, and that gesture became her life. He raised his palm, the eyes of the entire hall fixed on his fingers. First, he opened his palm, then tucked his thumb in, then closed 4 fingers over it. A silent scream, incomplete but powerful signal, help me. Silence fell over the hall, such silence that wasn't of fear, but of wisdom. This gesture is our children's shield. When there's no courage to speak, this gesture becomes their voice. Then he said the sentence that became the headline of the entire country. From today, this gesture will be taught in every school, every library, every market in Burkina Faso. This will become our national language, the language of silent screams. Applause erupted, teachers started smiling, parents' eyes became moist. Chapter 12, the hero's arrival. Suddenly the door opened and Layla entered, holding her mother's hand. The entire auditorium stood up. Children shouted happily, Layla has come, that brave girl. Traoré smiled, moved forward and sat near Layla, placing the microphone in front of her. Daughter, will you tell us when you made this gesture? Why did you do it? Layla wiped tears with her sleeve and spoke in a light but firm voice. I thought no one would see, but I still did it because I didn't want myself or any other child to ever get lost. Sobs echoed in the room, and then loud applause. Traoré pulled her close to him. Layla, today you didn't just save your life. You've taught the entire nation that there's strength even in silence. He stood up and said, This gesture, this girl, and this lesson will secure our children's future. Chapter 13, the wind of change. Outside was the media, but Traoré said just one sentence. Today's hero isn't me. It's that little girl who asked for help in silence, and the entire world heard her. In the following days, the atmosphere of Burkina Faso changed. Every channel, every radio, every school, every mosque had just one topic. A girl saved her life with a silent gesture, and the president recognized and saved her. Layla was no longer a movie heroine, she had become real hope. And Traoré had become more than a leader, the face of humanity. Chapter 14, National Address, the time of the movement. President Ibrahim Traoré called a special press conference, but this conference wasn't in the usual political tone. It was the voice of a nation's father speaking to his people in the language of the heart. Our daughter Layla survived a tyrant's hand because she made that gesture that we all should have known. From today, Thai's gesture will be necessary for every citizen. The entire hall was silent because this announcement was the beginning of a new era. Traoré repeated that gesture, opened his palm, tucked his thumb in, and closed his fingers. This small gesture can save a life. Now it will be part of our national educational system, in every school, every home, every office, every market. The hall echoed with applause. Chapter 15, Celebrating the Daughter's Bravery. 2 days later, a big program was held in the city's central community park. People called it a public ceremony, but actually it was Layla's day. Thousands of people gathered, small girls kept making that gesture with their hands. Teachers were explaining to groups of children. Women put "Safe Child Zone" stickers in every street. When Layla came on stage, the entire crowd stood up. Applause long, genuine, and filled with feeling. Layla held the microphone, voice soft but fearless. "I made this gesture because I didn't want any other girl to ever live in fear, and I was sure that someone would definitely see it." Traoré stood behind her. There was pride in his eyes and a father-like tenderness. He stepped forward and put his hand on her head. "Daughter, your courage has changed the lives of thousands of children. From today, you are this country's little ambassador, the ambassador of children's protection." Applause echoed in the crowd again. That moment became a golden page in Burkina Faso's history. Chapter 16, Unity of the Nation. That night across the entire country there was one scene. In every home, mothers and children sat together. Every mother, holding her child's hand, was saying, "Son, if there's ever danger, this is what you must do." Traoré said to the nation on TV, "Layla has shown us the way. Now we will all become protectors of that path." The girl who yesterday was about to be lost had today become the heartbeat of the entire country. Chapter 17, New Journey Silent Safety Signal Program. After that, even the morning wind of Burkina Faso changed. The country that once only heard news of weather and politics now had one question echoing in every street, every bus, every school. If a child makes this gesture, what will we do? Layla's story was no longer just an incident. It had become a movement. A movement born not from fear but from hope and responsibility. President Traoré issued the order for the Silent Safety Signal (SSS) program. Under this program, training would be held twice a year in every school. Every child would be taught danger signals and self-defense. Workshops would be held in women's centers. Awareness lectures would be held in mosques and community halls. Every driver, shopkeeper, tailor, barber, everyone would be taught this gesture. A decision that seemed impossible for a developing country. But Traoré knew that a nation becomes secure when every person becomes the protector of another. Chapter 18, Traoré, Rahel, and Layla, a new light. A week later, Rahel's message came. "Sir, today we slept peacefully for the first time, but Layla wants to meet you. She wants to say that her life changed because of you." Before coming, Traoré sent a small gift, a khaki-colored diary whose first page read, "Layla, the world will remember your bravery. Keep writing your dreams here. Your protector, Traoré." The next day they met. Layla had the diary pressed to her chest. Traoré bent down and sat. "Daughter, now everything is fine." Layla said softly, "Yes, but sometimes I get scared. Then I remember that you came and I get strength again." Tenderness came over Traoré's face. "Daughter, bravery doesn't mean not being afraid. Bravery means doing the right thing despite fear, and you showed that." Rahel said with gratitude and love in her eyes, "Sir, if you hadn't been there, my world would have ended." Traoré bowed his head. "Saving lives is my duty, not as a leader, but as a human, and the real hero is your daughter." Chapter 19, Final Address. A few days later, the president spoke his final words to the nation. Layla's story teaches us that if a small hand rises at the right time, it can change the entire world. That night across Burkina Faso's sky, the same thing was reflected from every house's window, a small palm, thumb in, fingers closed. "Help me." Now this wasn't just a gesture, it had become a nation's promise. Chapter 20, A New Chapter. A few weeks later, Layla returned to school. Initially, everyone would gather around her. Someone would call her hero girl, someone would hold her hand and ask questions, and someone would just look at her with respect. Layla would sometimes get nervous, but she was no longer that scared child. In her eyes now shone the light of confidence. In art class, she made a picture, a small girl with her hand in the help signal shape, and behind her, a tall shadow whose face had military dignity and father. Like tenderness, written below was, "My guardian, President Traoré." When she showed that picture to her mother, Rahel's tears couldn't stop. She knew that in this picture was hidden not just an image, but a faith, a new era. From that day on, Burkina Faso's children didn't just learn poems, stories, or math. They also learned, open your palm, tuck your thumb in, close your fingers, and the world can change. Traoré would often say in his speeches, "Layla saved her life, and we turned that story into a shield for other children. This is the strength of nations. Epilogue, the revolution of a silent gesture. Years later, when someone would ask Layla about that day, she would smile and say, "I was just a scared little girl who remembered what she was taught. The real hero was President Traoré, who saw my silent scream." And Traoré, in his interviews, would always say, "I was just a human being at the right place at the right time." The real courage was Layla's, who trusted that gesture even when she thought no one would see it. The silent safety signal became more than just a program. It became part of Burkina Faso's identity. Tourists visiting the country would notice children in schools practicing that gesture. Posters in markets would show that signal. Police officers would teach it to communities. But most importantly, every child in Burkina Faso grew up knowing that they had a voice even in silence, a way to call for help even when words failed them. And somewhere in Ouagadougou, in a small house with a garden of sunflowers, a young girl would draw pictures and tell stories to other children, always ending with the same message. Your voice matters even when it's silent. Someone will always be listening. And somewhere in the presidential palace, a leader would look at that same picture Layla had drawn, the one with a small girl and her tall guardian, and remember why he chose to serve his people. Not for power, not for glory, but for moments like these, when one life saved could inspire a nation. The story of Layla and President Traoré became a legend in Burkina Faso, a reminder that heroism comes in many forms, sometimes in the courage of a small girl to ask for help, and sometimes in the awareness of a leader to recognize that call and answer it. And across the country, in classrooms and homes, mothers and fathers would tell their children, "Remember Layla's story. Remember that you're never alone. Remember that your silent call will always be heard." The revolution of a silent gesture had changed a nation forever. 20 years later, the legacy continues. 20 years after that fateful day in the supermarket, Ouagadougou had transformed in ways both visible and invisible. The city had grown, new buildings reached toward the sky, paved roads replaced many of the old dirt paths, and technology had woven itself into daily life. But some things remained constant: the golden morning light, the sound of children laughing in streets, and the sunflowers that still grew in small gardens throughout the neighborhoods. Layla was 28 now, no longer the frightened 8-year-old, but a confident young woman with kind eyes and a purposeful stride. She had pursued psychology in university, specializing in childhood trauma and recovery. Her thesis, "The Power of Nonverbal Communication in Crisis Intervention," had won national recognition and had been published in international journals. But academic achievements weren't what drove her. It was the memory of that day, the feeling of helplessness transformed into hope by a single gesture and one observant man. She now ran the Layla Foundation, a nonprofit organization dedicated to child safety education across West Africa. The foundation's logo was simple but powerful: an open palm with a tucked thumb, rendered in the gold and red colors of the Burkinabe flag. The foundation operated in 12 countries, training teachers, parents, and community leaders in recognizing signs of distress and creating protective networks for vulnerable children. On the 20th anniversary of her rescue, a special ceremony was planned at the same supermarket where everything had changed. The building had been renovated, modernized, but the management had preserved one section exactly as it was, the frozen foods aisle where Layla had stood, trembling and terrified, making a gesture she barely believed anyone would see. President Ibrahim Traoré, now in his early 70s, still led Burkina Faso. His hair had grayed, lines had deepened on his face, but his eyes still held that same sharp awareness, that same unwavering commitment to his people. He had governed through challenges that would have broken lesser leaders' economic difficulties, regional conflicts, climate crises, but he had never wavered from his core belief: protect the vulnerable, empower the weak, and build a nation where every voice matters. The anniversary event drew hundreds of people, survivors of various forms of abuse and trafficking, came to share their stories. Many credited the silent safety signal with saving their lives. A teenage boy named Ibrahim spoke about how he'd used it during a Zoom class when his stepfather became violent. His teacher recognized it immediately and called authorities. A woman named Fatima described making the gesture from inside a car during what she thought would be a routine taxi ride, but turned into an attempted kidnapping. A motorcyclist who'd learned the signal through a public awareness campaign followed the car and alerted police. When Layla took the stage, the crowd rose in spontaneous applause. She stood quietly until the sound subsided, then began to speak. 20 years ago, I stood in this building, more frightened than I'd ever been in my young life. A man I barely knew was taking me away from everything safe and familiar, and I didn't know how to stop it. But I remembered something, a simple gesture a police officer had taught us, a signal I'd almost forgotten. I made that gesture not because I was sure anyone would see it, but because I had to try. I had to believe that somewhere someone was watching, someone would care. Her voice was steady, but emotion flickered in her eyes. That someone was President Traoré, but here's what I've learned in the 20 years since. He wasn't just one person in one moment. He represented what all of us can be: aware, responsive, ready to act when we see someone in need. The signal didn't save me. He did. But more importantly, the culture he helped create, a culture where people look out for each other, where we're trained to recognize distress and respond with courage. That's what truly keeps us safe. President Traoré was seated in the front row, and when Layla gestured toward him, he stood. The applause was thunderous. He walked slowly to the stage, not with the vigor of youth, but with the dignity of a leader who had earned every gray hair, every line, every moment of respect. He embraced Layla like a father embracing his daughter, and when he spoke into the microphone, his voice still carried that commanding warmth that had defined his leadership. Years ago, I was in the right place at the right time, yes. But Layla is correct. This isn't about one moment or one man. This is about what we build together. Since that day, do you know how many children have been saved by this signal? Our national database has recorded over 3,000 incidents where the silent safety signal led to intervention and rescue. 3,000 children who might otherwise have become statistics, who might have disappeared into trafficking networks or worse. He paused, letting the number sink in. But numbers don't capture the real story. The real story is that we created a nation where looking out for each other isn't exceptional, it's expected. Where a shop owner knows to watch for that signal. Where a bus driver understands that a child making that gesture needs immediate help. Where teachers, neighbors, even other children know to respond. From the audience, a voice called out, "How did you see it? In that moment with everything happening, how did you notice?" Traoré smiled. Because I was trained to look. Because years of military service and security work had taught me to observe, to notice what's out of place. But more than that, because I chose to pay attention. In our modern world, we're surrounded by distractions. Phones, screens, our own busy thoughts. But that day, I was present. I was seeing the people around me not as background noise, but as human beings, each with their own story, their own struggles. He turned to Layla, and I saw a child who was trying desperately to communicate something her voice couldn't say. That's the lesson I hope every person here takes away. Be present, be observant, be ready. Because any one of us at any moment might be the person someone else needs. After the official ceremony, Layla took President Traoré to the exact spot where she'd stood 20 years ago. The deep freezers still hummed with the same sound. The fluorescent lights cast the same harsh glow. But everything felt different now. "Do you remember what you said to me?" Layla asked. "Right after you stopped Craig." "I said, daughter, now you're with me. You're completely safe." Those words, Layla's voice caught. Those words changed everything, not just for me, but for how I understand safety itself. You gave me something more important than physical rescue. You gave me the knowledge that I was worth protecting, that my silent call mattered, that the world contained people who would fight for me even when I couldn't fight for myself. Traoré's eyes glistened. "And you, Layla, have multiplied that gift thousands of times over. Every child your foundation has helped, every parent you've educated, every community leader you've trained, they're all carrying forward what be." Egan here, this is how change happens. Not through grand gestures alone, but through one person's courage inspiring another's action, which creates a ripple that becomes a wave. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment. Two people connected by a moment of crisis, transformed into a lifetime of purpose. "There's something I never told you," Layla finally said. "After it happened, for months I had nightmares. Every night I'd dream I was making that signal and no one could see me. I'd be screaming silently and everyone would just walk past. It terrified me more than the actual event, the idea that I could call for help and no one would answer." "And now," Traoré asked gently, "now I know that was never the real danger. The real danger isn't that people won't help, it's that we create societies where people don't know how to help, where we're so disconnected from each other that we miss the signals, ignore the signs. But we've built something different here. We've built awareness. We've built connection. We've built a nation that watches over its children." As they prepared to leave, a young mother approached with a girl about 7 years old. The mother spoke hesitantly. "Excuse me, President Traoré, Miss Layla. My daughter wanted to say something." The little girl stepped forward, shy but determined. She looked at Layla and said, "When I grow up, I want to be brave like you." Layla knelt down to the child's level. "You know what real bravery is? It's not being unafraid. It's being afraid and still doing what needs to be done. Can you show me the signal you learned in school?" The girl raised her hand, palm open, thumb tucked, fingers folded, executing it perfectly. "Beautiful," Layla said. "Remember that gesture, but more importantly, remember that you have a voice. If you're scared, if something's wrong, you can always ask for help. And someone will be there. Someone will always be there." The mother's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you, both of you, for everything you've built here." As the sun set over Ouagadougou that evening, the city's lights began to twinkle like earthbound stars. In homes throughout the city, throughout the nation, families were gathering for dinner, children were being tucked into bed, and the rhythms of ordinary life continued their ancient patterns. But woven through that ordinary life was something extraordinary, a thread of watchfulness, of collective responsibility, of a promise kept across 20 years. That no child's silent cry would go unheard, that no moment of danger would pass unnoticed, that the revolution begun by one frightened girl and one observant leader would continue, generation after generation. In her office at the foundation, Layla kept 2 items prominently displayed. One was the khaki diary President Traoré had given her all those years ago, now filled with her dreams, her hopes, her plans for expanding child safety programs throughout Africa. The other was the drawing she'd made as a child, a small girl with her hand raised in the signal of distress, and behind her the tall shadow of her guardian. Beneath it, in her adult handwriting, she had added a caption: "One moment can change everything. One gesture can save a life. One person watching can make all the difference. This is not just my story, this is our story, and it continues in every child who knows they are protected, in every adult who chooses to pay attention, in every community that says, 'We see you, we hear you, we will keep you safe.'" The silent signal revolution had indeed changed a nation forever. But more than that, it had proven a simple truth: that heroism isn't about superpowers or dramatic rescues. It's about awareness, compassion, and the choice to act when action is needed. It's about creating a world where no one faces danger alone, where every silent cry finds an answer, where love and protection are woven into the very fabric of society. And on that anniversary evening, as President Traoré looked out over the city he had served for so long, he allowed himself a rare moment of pride. Not pride in his own actions, but pride in what they had built together, a nation where children could grow up knowing they were valued, protected, and heard. Somewhere in Ouagadougou, a small hand raised in a garden, fingers forming a familiar shape, not in distress this time, but in triumph, in remembrance, in promise. The sunflowers swayed in the evening breeze, their golden faces turned toward the fading light, and in that moment everything that had been broken 20 years ago felt beautifully, perfectly whole. Final word count, approximately 9,000 words.